Hopefully that's working. All right. Hello and thank you for coming, everyone. This lunch panel is hosted by the Duke Immigrant and Refugee Project and the Immigrants' Rights Clinic. It's also co-sponsored by the Office of the Dean and the Office of Public Interest in Pro Bono and the Keenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University and the Sanford School of Public Policy. So thank you so much to all of our sponsors. Please be aware that this event is being recorded and is going to be distributed both on a YouTube format and an audio lecture and by the Office of Pro Bono. During this event, please try to leave your microphones muted and your videos off. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask our panelists, please send them to the chat, send them to me in the chat privately. I will try to leave some time at the end to answer all those questions. Before I go on, I'd also like to say a big thank you to Professor Kate Evans, the director of the Immigrants' Rights Clinic, and to Mary Chandler Beam, the DERP event coordinator. Together, they've been able to put together an amazing speaker series this fall, and this lunch panel is the final event in the series, and we could not be more excited to have these two panelists with us today to talk about pro bono in private practice. So based on our career statistics, we know that the majority of us are going to go work for big law firms at some point in our career, if not for the majority of our career. In these positions, we're going to be working on hugely important matters, but that doesn't mean that we have to stop working for the public interest matters that mattered most to us. I'm proud to say that the Duke Immigrant and Refugee Project is currently one of the biggest pro bono projects at Duke Law, and you don't have to stop doing this work once you go to a big law firm. Today, I'll be talking to our panelists about specifically what doing pro bono at a big law firm looks like, both from the law firm's perspective and from the nonprofit's perspective. We're gonna be asking questions like, how important is this work to the nonprofits? Do you have to have any substantive knowledge before taking on a pro bono case? Can you really actually take on pro bono cases as a first year or a second year associate? Before we get into all these questions, let me just take a moment to really introduce our panelists. So first we have Stephen Schulman. Stephen is the pro bono partner at Akin Gump in Washington, D.C. In his career, he has handled dozens of asylum and other immigration cases with a particular emphasis on complex matters such as those involving the application of terrorism-related grounds and inadmissibility. We also have Jennifer Grishkin. Jennifer is the pro bono coordinating attorney at Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, also known as CARE Coalition. I had the privilege of working with Jennifer at CARE Coalition last summer, where I got a glimpse into the ways that she works with both CARE Coalition and partner law firms to place pro bono cases. Before joining CARE, Jennifer was a research associate at the Migration Policy Institute, where she focused on the impacts of US immigration policy and enforcement trends upon children and families. She also was a trial attorney with the DOJ and a litigation associate with Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering. I'm beyond excited to have you both here today to talk about who you are, your career path, and for you to give us advice about what we can do as young attorneys to continue working in the field of immigration, even when we're at a big law firm. So to begin, I want to give you both the opportunity to talk more about who you are, your personal career path, and then what you do currently in your position. So first, we'll start with Steve.
Thanks, Jenny. And I will jump in real quick and answer one of the questions that Jenny asked, which is, can you do immigration work at a big law firm? And I would say absolutely. And it is at any big law firm, probably 15 to 20 to 30% of the docket is immigration. And so you will have every opportunity to do many types of immigration that both Jennifer and I will talk about today. As generally said, my name's Steve Schulman. I'm the pro bono partner at Akin Gump, Strauss, Howard & Feld. I'm located in our Washington office, but I'm responsible for the firm-wide pro bono practice. About a third of our pro bono practice, I would say, relates in some way to immigration work. I've been at Akin for 14 years, since 2006. Before that, I started my career in 1994 after I graduated from Northwestern Law School at Latham & Watkins here in Washington, where I've been resident ever since. Believe it or not, I didn't take my first significant pro bono case until I was a fourth year associate, which is which today would be very unusual, but back in the 90s was not that unusual. And the way I got involved in immigration work was I was at a litigation lunch, just a general litigation lunch for our litigation department at Latham. And I have this habit after I eat, especially like a sandwich or something that has some carbs in it, that I get a little bit tired. So I was a little bit tired that day and kind of dozing off. And I heard somebody say like, well, we need a volunteer for a trial. And I hadn't done a trial yet. So I raised my hand. I'm like, yep, I'll do a trial. And then they told me it was an immigration court and it was a pro bono trial. And I didn't know where the immigration court was. And I mean that really in every respect. I didn't know what agency the immigration court was in. It happens to be in the Department of Justice. I didn't know where the immigration court was. It happens to be the one that this case was in Arlington, Virginia. The client was from Nigeria. If I had really been pushed, I probably could have found Nigeria on a map. Thankfully, they speak English in Nigeria, so I was introduced to my client shortly thereafter. A corporate associate had taken the case at the asylum office, which is an interview-only office, and so it is entirely appropriate for non-litigators, but the asylum office had denied the case, and my client, who is a pro-democracy activist, had been supporting the opposition candidate in the mid-90s in Nigeria, a guy named MKO Abiola, who was running against the dictator Sani Abacha. My client had been jailed and tortured and had thankfully fled Nigeria. So I had about 2 months to learn all about the immigration court. I got my case from, this probably predates the Capital Immigrant Rights Coalition. I can't remember exactly when it started, although, because I was around when it started, I think. This was from what was then known as Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, and what is Human Rights First. No one in my firm had taken an asylum case ever, which is not the case at any law firm of any size these days. But we made it to immigration court. I won't tell you the whole story of it because that could go on for a while. But in short order, we won the case. And that was one of the most significant things still that I've ever done, even though I've won cases since. That first one of standing there next to my client and saying, you don't have to go home. You're safe here. That client, Tolu Odolami, is now a U.S. citizen. He had 5 children at the time, still has 5 children. 4 of them came over from Nigeria. 1 was born here. All those clients are now all those children are now U.S. citizens. I now have been representing Tolu's daughter, who married a Nigerian, in getting him his visa. So I'm on the 2nd generation of my first asylum client. And I also worked with her. She went to school. She is a rocket scientist, believe it or not, and she is a literal rocket scientist. And the Department of Defense was trying to deny her a security clearance because of her Nigerian background. And that is probably the only time I will litigate a clearance case, but I litigated that for her and we were able to win that. So that was my background in kind of how I got introduced to asylum. Immigration is very broad on the pro bono side. It's very broad otherwise, but you've probably heard of many of the other types of immigration work that law firms do. When I came over to Akin Gump, we started a summer project working with domestic violence victims who were getting benefit under what's called the Violence Against Women Act, which gets them a path to green card and citizenship based on their marriage to a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. And so every summer now since 2007, we have represented women in every office where we have a summer program and obtained approvals for, I've lost count, but it's well over 200 women in that time period. And so that's something that our summer associates actually get the experience of doing right away. We also do in that context U visas, which are visas for victims of violent crime. It's a similar process, not identical, but in terms of we're able to do that over the summer. And then I've been involved in various litigation, federal court litigation. We represent um, uh, people who have potentially are going to have their TPS, their temporary protected status revoked from El Salvador. And then there's policy work you can do in immigration as well. And I've had the good fortune to work with an organization called Appleseed and done a number of reports on the immigration court system, on the child immigration system at the border, on DACA. So I've had kind of a lot of opportunity to work with attorneys all over the country, and I would say the one thing that makes immigration work so possible at law firms, or maybe not one thing, it's a couple of things. One is that no matter what office we're doing it in, since it's federal law, it's generally the same. There are differences among the circuits. For those of you who have waded into immigration law, you might know that the circuits sometimes have splits in the way that they deal with substantive law issues. But for the most part, if I have an asylum case, I know that I can, if I'm in DC, I can still supervise it in Texas because it's pretty much the same type of case. I would not feel comfortable, for example, supervising a landlord-tenant case in Texas because that's very local. And then immigration, putting aside the big litigation, and CARE's been involved in some of that, and I'm sure Jennifer will talk a bit about that, like the big TPS cases. For the most part, the litigation that we do in immigration court, or the applications like VAWA or U visa that we do, are very predictable in the sense of at least the timing and the process. Unlike a state or federal court litigation, you're not going to get DHS filing something on a Friday night in an immigration court case. If you take an immigration court case, as long as we know when it's been scheduled, I can actually very easily spell out how it's going to happen. And for those of you worried about balancing pro bono work with your billable practice at a law firm, that kind of predictability makes it much easier to take on these kinds of immigration cases. So let me turn it over then to Jennifer to give her an introduction.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Jennifer Grishkin, and I'll give you just a short glimpse of my career path, which is a little bit of an unusual career path with some detours, but generally hit the high points. I went to Wake Forest undergrad and then graduated from Yale Law School in 1997. I clerked for Judge Stapleton on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Then I was at Wilmer Cutler and Pickering when it was still known as Wilmer Cutler and Pickering back 98 to 2002. So about 4 years. And then I went to the Department of Justice as a trial attorney in the Office of Consumer Litigation. And I was there for about 4 years as well. While I was at DOJ, I had the opportunity to litigate one appellate immigration case. It was a federal appellate case. And the reason that came about was because it was part of the Bush administration litigation priorities. And there was a lot of pressure on all DOJ attorneys to take cases or to even do details at the Office of Immigration Litigation. And my office dealt with that by just having us each share the load of taking a case or two. At that time, I thought that was miserable and I did not enjoy that experience. But that's when I was on the government side of immigration. So then I took 7 years away from practice where I raised 4 children, or started raising them. I'm still raising them. And then around 2014, when my youngest was 2, I saw that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I might have some more time. That light did not appear to be an oncoming train. So I started volunteering with Catholic Charities, and I still wasn't ready to take on trials. So I did other things. And I mention this because there are lots of different opportunities. I did asylum cases for unaccompanied children. I helped with those as part of a team where I helped with the interviewing. I wrote the submission packages for USCIS. I also did similar types of work on U visa cases for both adults and children, where it's applications before the agency, and it's a matter of interviewing the client, including one client from Ghana who spoke English. So that was very easy for me because I am an intermediate Spanish speaker at best, and my French is very, very rusty. So that was a really rewarding experience, and it did not involve, going into court yet. I have since returned to court, but so I enjoyed that volunteering. And the reason that I came to volunteering, I really enjoyed your story, Steve. For me, it was a matter of what was sort of grabbing my interest and my passion at the time, that I was thinking, well, what do I want to do next? And 2014 was the year of the big surge in unaccompanied children coming across the border. And there were a few other things that sort of came into play and made it all make sense as the right fit for me, including, as Steve mentioned, that it is federal law and you do not have to be barred in the state that you practice in immigration court. Now, for one type of case that we do, which is special immigrant juvenile status, you do have to be a member of the state bar or be pro hoc vitaed in. But for the most part, if you want to take an immigration case, you can be barred in any state and appear in immigration court. So that was one little aspect, one factor that came into my decision. And I joined Care Coalition in 2019. I've been there long enough that I'm starting to understand what we do and feel like I've really sort of hit my stride, and I can speak somewhat intelligibly on immigration matters in general. Would you like me to discuss a little bit what Care Coalition does? Do you want to switch to something else, Jenna Lee? Oh, and I should say that it was actually my great privilege to work with Jenna Lee this summer. So, and I'm going to be sprinkling in little pitches for internships as we go along, but this is actually one great example of why internships are so wonderful. Like, the opportunity to have this continued relationship is just really invaluable to me. So anyway.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I'm so happy that we were able to get you to come here today. And I would love if you could talk a little bit about Care Coalition, just at a high level, what you do, and specifically what you do in your role working with partnering law firms.
Sure. So broadly speaking, we are the provider of immigration legal services to detained adults and children, immigration detention, in the nation's capital area. And so first, let's just break that down into adults and children. We meet children when they are in Office of Refugee Resettlement immigration facilities. We go in, we do intakes, we do Know Your Rights presentations, we assess children for potential relief, deportation defenses, and immigration relief. And then, as long as the child, and typically most children then reunify with a sponsor, who very typically is a family member, a parent, or a close family member. Once they reunify and they're released from immigration detention or the shelter, we will continue to work with them as long as they stay in our geographic area. There are also some kids who stay detained for a very long time, whether it's because they have no sponsor here, or because they've been accused of something that makes them might make them a danger to the community, or they've had some disciplinary issues. And so those children do stay detained for a long time, and we represent them. On the adult side, we also similarly go into the adult detention facilities, which very commonly are just jails that have leased space to immigration detention. And we go in on a regular basis. When I say go in, we used to physically actually go in. We have suspended that because of COVID for the time being. We go in and just like with the kids, we do Know Your Rights presentations, assess them for relief. We assess whether they're capable of representing themselves. If they have a defense to deportation, we think about whether they'd be appropriate for pro bono placement. We have, depending on the jurisdiction and the specifics of the adult, we have different rules for whether we can take cases ourselves, whether we're allowed to pro bono place those. And so it sort of depends at that point. On the adult side, typically you're looking at fear-based defenses to deportation, or sometimes if the person has been here for a long time and either has a green card or doesn't, but has been here for a very long time, and also there's hardship to US citizen or green card holder family members, you can argue cancellation of deportation there. We don't do, as Steve was mentioning, the different types of immigration law, we really focus on defenses to deportation. And so typically we don't see a lot of people who have a family-based or an employment-based visa that they're eligible for. We would assess for that, but that's not what we do. Let me tell you about 1/3 aspect. So that's kids, adults, and then we have our Immigration Impact Lab, which is really sort of our cutting edge, experimenting with high impact cases. We've had that, I believe, 4 years now. And as Steve mentioned, we have had some very high impact cases and we've had some high impact victories. And one in particular is Care Coalition versus Trump. That had to do with what we call Asylum Ban 2.0, which dealt with whether somebody can seek asylum if they have passed through other countries on their way here without seeking asylum in those countries. Spoiler alert, we're doing great on that. There's an injunction in place. And another recent high impact win I'd like to tell you about is in Maryland. It's called Dubon-Miranda, and the bond system in immigration cases, if you are a detained immigrant, if you're not in a category where you must be kept detained, the system, generally speaking, is that the burden is on you to prove whether you should be released while you await your day in court. And also, the court does not have to take into account your ability to pay. That's sort of the default. And so we see lots of people who are not a danger and are sometimes given bonds, but they're like $20,000. And so they stay in detention. So we brought suit in Maryland on a class action basis and we won. And the burden has flipped in Maryland. And this is just the past few months. And now the burden is on the government to show danger to the community and flight risk. And now the immigration judge must take into account ability to pay. So I hope I've sort of mentioned all three of our main components: the kids program, the adult program, and our impact immigration lab.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such a good overview of what CARE does specifically. And I think also giving highlights into what type of pro bono cases young attorneys could take on in terms of immigration. I also would like to ask if maybe Steve, you could speak to the types of skills that attorney or young attorneys can build in taking on these types of cases, and particularly for attorneys both in litigation practices and also maybe is there opportunity for people who are in transactional practices to take on these types of cases, and what can they gain from them?
Right. So as I mentioned, there's a wide variety of immigration work that we do at law firms. And so the one that is probably most kind of intuitive to people, especially to law students, is the litigation side. Jennifer talked about kind of the impact litigation side. And then there's the immigration court litigation, defensive litigation, typically, filing asylum or other types of relief like cancellation of removal. And we've worked closely with CARE on many of those cases. So for those, obviously, getting stand-up experience in court is a great experience. An immigration court trial is typically half a day, I would say. I mean, that's typical. Some of them can go on for a long time, not long like in federal court terms long, but can go multiple days over multiple months where you kind of come back and forth. But for the most part, you're talking about a half a day trial that's pretty easy to put on. One of the unusual things, and Jennifer talked about the unusual thing about burden on the bond side in immigration court, because the issue is really the issue that's being put before the court initially is removal. And most of our clients concede what's called concede removability. In other words, if you're here in the United States and you don't have a visa and you don't have any other way to stay, you say, yes, I'm removable, but I'm applying for asylum or withholding of removal or relief under the Convention Against Torture. And so oddly then, even though you're in defensive asylum, the burden is on the client, is on the respondent to prove eligibility for that relief. And so because the burden's on your client, you're the one who's putting forth all the evidence, and DHS typically is not putting on any evidence. Again, typically there are times when DHS will put things on, but in my experience, and I've been doing immigration court work for 22 years, I can name easily on one hand the number of times DHS has brought a witness or has even submitted something substantial on the other side, which again makes it pretty easy. But you do get in-court experience. When I say easy, it makes it easy to predict what's going to happen. I don't mean it makes it easy to win. But you get brief writing experience, you get experience standing up in court, you get experience working with often expert witnesses and helping them develop their testimony. You get experience examining and doing then redirect. You typically don't get to do cross-exam because again, DHS isn't putting people on the stand themselves. In terms of other skills, and one of the reasons we do the VAWA petitions during the summer, so under the Violence Against Women Act, a woman has to prove, and doesn't under the statute literally have to be a woman, but we've done 200 plus cases and had one man in those cases. So it's almost always for sad societal reasons, women who are seeking protection under the Violence Against Women Act. They have to prove that they were in a good faith marriage to U.S. citizen or permanent resident. So those are two different things, the existence of the marriage. And that it was in good faith, that the person is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, that they were subjected to physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and that they are a person of good moral character. This is all put together in a single kind of package that goes to a special VAWA office in Vermont, the DHS has up there. But when you think about it, we put together that package with summer associates in 10 weeks. And it really does tick off a lot of the things we want to see in our future lawyers: writing ability to deal with clients, and all of these, of course, all of these areas of immigration require and help you develop strong client handling skills. If you can work with a woman who has undergone domestic violence or a torture survivor, you can work with the CEO of a major corporation. Like that is going to develop that skill in how to handle somebody, how do you handle a client who wants to talk to you every single day? How do you establish boundaries? There's lots of things you can learn in that. And it also gives you a chance to engage in project management. And so our summer associates who are doing the Violence Against Women Act petition, they start it almost on day one, meeting with the client, and by the end of the summer, they need to figure out how they're going to finish the package. So they need to say, okay, I'm not just going to rely on a supervisor to tell me when the deadlines are. I'm going to set my own deadlines. I know that in order to finish the package, I need to get a witness declaration. Okay, I can't wait until the week before it's due to reach out to the witness. So we have to do that. So it actually develops those kinds of skills, which are extraordinarily important in the law firm context, in any real legal context, in managing a project. So I think you get all of those skills in immigration. And then one of the other benefits, and I'll turn over to Jennifer to talk, but I'll just tee this up, is the wide variety of ways that you can work in immigration. And that as you look at your career, the ways that on the pro bono side you can get involved range from, again, doing simple applications like a DACA application for somebody, all the way to litigating the Supreme Court and doing policy work on Capitol Hill. I mean, there's such a wide variety, and I think that's what makes it attractive as well, is that it's not doing the same thing again and again, although some people like that and find comfort that they become an expert and can continue to do that as part of their pro bono practice. But it also means that you can get involved throughout your career using different skills that you develop and having a significant impact.
And I'll echo a few things Steve said and add a little bit more. Taking that example of a transactional attorney, not interested in being a litigator, still there are so many ways that you can help that have more to do with putting together a package, marshaling evidence. Like, to me, that sort of resonates with how corporate attorneys are preparing for, I don't know, I'm out of my depths here, but like I would think that you're, preparing for like your mergers and acquisitions or something else. You're really getting everything together and lining it up and trying to be persuasive to the agency. I also
we're both litigators, Jennifer, so we're both a little bit struggling to say, what the heck do they do? They've got a lot of paper. They get people to sign things. That's what they do.
Marshal evidence, right? We do try to stress that there's something for everyone. So if you are interested in litigation, just like Steve said, on the adult side, you can get stand-up courtroom, very trial-like experience very quickly. And yes, the rules are a little bit different in immigration in that the rules are more like guidelines. You look to the federal rules of evidence sort of as a guide, but in some ways it can kind of feel more like a mediation where it's knife fight rules or something we used to say. It's a very, it is an administrative court. It's not even an administrative law judge. It's a DOJ attorney. It feels like a courtroom and it feels like a regular trial in some ways. As Steve said, there are some very significant differences. I went to trial a year ago on an asylum case for a woman who came to us as an unaccompanied child, and it took her 5 years to get her day in court. So she was by then an adult and had a baby a month earlier. So it was just a regular at that point because she was out of the USCIS system. She was in immigration court. It was just like it would have been for someone who came to us as an adult. And as Steve mentioned, that case took half a day. There are very different things versus a regular trial. Like, there aren't really closings. There's more of a dialogue with the judge usually about whether you've proven all the elements of relief. There's opening statements are a little bit different too. That didn't stop me from writing several openings. And then it is mostly, the main event is your client. The government will cross-examine your client. And so that's excellent practice, with cross-exam. You don't get to cross-exam, but it's a lot of great practice with dealing with cross-examinations, objections, things like that. I was the person, I also worked very closely with the client, but I wasn't the person who did her direct. I was the person who dealt with our two witnesses, our expert witnesses. And that is something I'll also mention for folks who maybe are a little bit hesitant to take on a case if they don't speak a language other than English. Of course, there are ways to get around that. I work with a legal assistant who will translate for me, and I know firms often have staff who will do that. But also, it's an excellent opportunity to work with expert witnesses to really understand how to help them craft their expert witness report or their affidavit, to understand how to lead them effectively through a voir dire and through direct exam, and to be prepared for cross-examination. And that is something that's very transferable to your law firm work. I would also say, think about if you're a transactional attorney, you really don't want to be involved in litigation. Still there are options like putting together applications for USCIS, taking on a U visa case, taking on a T visa case for trafficking victims. Oh, and I think Steve might have mentioned it, but U visa is for victims of serious crimes, and I have done those cases before. And those are just a wonderful opportunity to help somebody. You're not going to have to go into a courtroom setting if that's not what you're interested in. And also, one other thing I'll mention, it's not necessarily a skill, but I think it's a real reason to do any kind of pro bono work at a law firm. And that's the opportunity to work with people in different practice groups at your firm to build those relationships that you might not ordinarily get to. When I was at a law firm, I really enjoyed, as a pro bono attorney, working with people outside my practice group. And often it does fall on the more junior folks to be the one to do that, because you may be the person who's really interested in taking on a case. And then the issue is, do you have the support at your firm, and can you create the team? And we had one case recently where a woman who had interned for us and then went to her law firm, Sidley, she kept a case that she had worked on, or she took it again when I asked her, that she had worked on while she was interning with us. And then she was able to get one of my law school classmates, who is not in her practice area at all, to agree to be the partner on it. They had a stunning victory just a few weeks after taking it. So that's another great thing about any kind of pro bono work, not only the skills that you'll build and that can transfer, but also your opportunities to grow your relationships within your firm.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, Jennifer. We've had many of our teams are cross-practice teams, cross-office teams even. One of the good things about immigration too is that you can build a relatively large team. There are things that you can peel off. I've actually had folks in our London office and Abu Dhabi office work on asylum cases, doing country conditions reports and things like that. So there's lots of work that can be done pretty efficiently by people who aren't members of the core team either. And so there is, and it's interesting. It's not just, I don't mean peeling something off that's kind of just a mundane task. I mean, doing the country conditions research on, Somalia can actually be quite interesting. So so there's lots of opportunity around for folks around the firm.
Yeah, thank you both so much. That's really helpful. And that leads me exactly into what I wanted to talk about next, which is, I think one of the fears that young attorneys have about taking on pro bono cases is feeling out of their area of comfort. And so I wanted to hear if you both could speak about the role that you play in mentoring young attorneys, or any attorney taking on these cases. What does mentorship look like at the law firm? I know you talked about people across practice groups working together, but what exactly would that look like? And then also from the Care Coalition side, what I know mentorship was a big centerpiece when you were talking to law firms. So I'd just like to hear if you could talk a little bit more about what that exactly looks like.
Sure. So I will say, for young attorneys are new to everything, and so everything's new. And so, and I don't mean that at all facetiously. It's just that's what it's like. That's what your life is like for a couple of years at least. And it does get it is a bit terrifying. I still remember when I was a first and second year associate and feeling like every time I got a new project, it was just something I didn't know. And eventually you'll get your sea legs, and you'll get comfortable in what you're doing. And so in that way, I find working with younger attorneys much easier, because the more senior attorneys who don't have experience don't want to work in an area they don't have experience in, often because they know how expert they are in one area, and they feel like if they're not bringing that level of expertise to something, they're not doing their job. And so, in fairness, those are the partners of mine who've never done it require as much mentoring as the young associates, because they feel more nervous in some ways. But in terms of that, one of the things I mentioned at the top of this is most law firms have very substantial immigration pro bono practices. And that means that there are lots of people around the firm who have experience. When you think about Akin Gump, just to give you an example, we started, I guess this was our 14th summer doing our VAWA project, which means that anybody who was a summer associate at the firm, who's basically been at the firm now for 12 years, has done a VAWA case. So there's half of our law firm has done VAWA cases. So we have that built-in experience. I've done asylum work for 22 years and have others in the firm who've done that. So we kind of know that area. And then we also, though part of our mentorship is relying on the legal aid organizations like CARE and Human Rights First and others, because honestly, I don't get to court, in it at least, and I get to court all over the country sometimes. I did a case in Chicago earlier this year. And so I don't know all the judges and know what's going on. So I'll call up Michael Lukens or Jennifer Kerr and say, what are you hearing about this judge? We had a case last summer with Kerr, a woman who it was a LGBT case. That we tried in immigration court. I had never heard of the judge before. And so they were very good about training us on who the judge was and getting that kind of experience. So it's all, even for those of us who have pretty deep experience, we still rely on Care Coalition, Human Rights First, and others to give us some guidance about what they're seeing in the field, because their view is so broad. I mean, Jennifer and Kara are working with dozens of law firms on dozens of cases and getting that kind of intelligence, which is incredibly valuable. And so I would say, just as a word of advice, never be worried about taking on a case as long as you know that there's a good legal aid organization that's mentoring it. You will get that kind of support that you need, and also just realize that even the lawyers who are expert in an area have new things thrown at them all the time, and that's why you will like being a lawyer, because as lawyers, at least at the level that our firms practice, we are not doing the same thing again and again and again, just day in and day out. We're building on our expertise, which is important. It doesn't mean we're doing things completely new all the time, but we are learning, and I think that is something that keeps me motivated on a daily basis.
I'll add a couple things on mentorship. And I'm sorry, I think I did skip over this. It was supposed to be addressed at the very beginning about how we work with law firms. So our model is robust mentoring. On a typical case, once the firm has agreed to take it on, we will then assign a Care Coalition mentor to be the primary point of contact going forward. That person will really shepherd the pro bono team through the case, and it depends on the case how much the firm wants help from the mentor, or they can say we're fine, thank you, because it's not, for the most part, we do not keep cases as co-counsel unless we sometimes use that model with high impact cases. For the most part, this is your case, and we are here to help and advise. We provide samples, and we work hard to create a robust samples library too, of up-to-date samples to share with our pro bono teams. Exactly like Steve said, we try to keep good files on judges, trial attorneys on the government side, so that we can share that knowledge and experience with our pro bono teams. I also will go to our pro bono teams to help give us that expertise and that knowledge. And in fact, sometimes even teams that weren't our teams. I think it was a Williams and Connolly team recently. I happened to know the attorneys. I knew that they had a great result. I asked if they'd be, willing to share. I think we had helped them by looking over their documents and advising them, but it wasn't our case. And they were just wonderful. And we had an hour-long session where we talked about how the trial went. They sent me redacted samples. They gave us lots of good intel about a new immigration judge. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind too, is that both sides learn from the other. We really learn a lot from what our pro bono teams see too. The one other thing I want to echo about mentorship is what Steve said about that expertise that the firms grow within their own firm. We are very selective about who we partner with as our pro bono partners. The law firms that we go to that we trust and rely upon, Akin Gump is one of our favorite firms. Our model is to partner with law firms that can have those teams with, multiple attorneys, because sometimes, especially on the kid side, the cases can take a while. It's very good for turnover, for there to be a team and not just one person. We also partner with a few corporate in-house legal departments. One thing I see is often very well-meaning people who were sort of in the same position I was in 6 years ago, when I just really wanted to help on immigration matters, but I was, you know, still on my own, an attorney, but not with a firm. I get lots of inquiries from them, and that is not our model for a few reasons. And one of them is that they don't have that firm, those resources, the firm backing them up. And that's the way that we operate. So anything else for, oh, and let me just also say one thing. Steve mentioned, you know, when you choose to work with, you know, an organization like CARE or Human Rights First, I want to emphasize that also do your due diligence when you're looking at where you want to spend your time and effort, because it is really valuable time and effort. And you should, you know, look around at the different organizations, see what their models are, what their policies are. Do they do the type of work that you are interested in? But also, you know, ask around at your firms. What's the word? Same sort of intel that we like to get on judges and trial attorneys. You know, what is this organization like to partner with? Are they going to support me? Are they going to mentor me? And also, I will also say, don't be shy about really asking for information from that firm when you want to take a case. One of my philosophies is I want the pro bono team to really have a very satisfying experience. Even if they don't win, I want it to be a good experience. And so I want to give them as much information as I think that they would want, that, you know, as much information as I would want before they accept a case. So don't be shy about saying, you know, can you tell me a little bit more about this? Or can you help me, you know, decide between these two cases? Can somebody talk with me? I just did this a few days ago for a firm that was trying to decide what kind of SIDG case to take, and they had never taken one before. And I think the kinds of organizations you want to work with are the kinds that are willing to do that, because they want you to have a good experience. And, you know, for a few reasons, including they want you to come back and take another case, or they want their reputation and their brand to grow within their firm.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. And it's really painting a, you know, a really nice picture of this partnership between law firms and nonprofits in a way that I don't think is talked about enough. But my next question kind of goes to also everybody remember to send me your questions via the chat. But my next question goes to the fear I think a lot of people have about taking on pro bono cases we all hear the rumors about how big your workload is already. So taking on more cases, I think, can be a little daunting. And I would just love if either of you could talk about what the actual time commitment looks like for taking on pro bono cases. Are there, and along with this mentorship, is it doable and manageable? And what does that look like as a young attorney?
So I would say two things is first, you know, look at, as you're considering, and I don't know what the audience here is exactly, but the first years and second years who have not yet picked law firms for next summer, you know, think about whether a law firm gives billable hour credit for pro bono, because that will send a big message about how that's valued. Now, that said, I mean, obviously, on a macro level, when we take on pro bono work, that is more work than we would otherwise be taking on as a firm. We don't turn away billable work to take on pro bono work, believe it or not. Those words have never been said in the halls of a law firm. I'm too busy on my pro bono work. We're not taking any more billable work, right? So since we're not, that said, what it means is that everybody has to kind of balance it out a little bit. Our associates average about, probably, especially in litigation, our litigation associates are probably 200 hours per year per associate is kind of an average number. And so what that means is that
I'm sorry,
yeah.
the average for pro bono?
For pro bono.
Sorry,
okay. Right, sorry. The average pro bono hours per associate, especially in litigation, would be about 200 hours. Now, if none of them did it, nobody would be working those 200 hours extra, right? So part of it is looking at what kind of matter you're taking on, what your workload is. It doesn't mean that every pro bono hour just means an extra hour that you're working, but it also is an additional level of responsibility that you're taking on. And so the one piece of advice I give to people when they ask, you know, how much pro bono should I take or too much is really, it's not about how much, it's about what kind of matter you're taking on, what team you have, the amount of communication you're having with your supervisor. So one of the things you need to make sure to do, and this is not just on the pro bono versus billable side, but all your workload is communicating with your supervisors, and whether that's someone who's basically a practice administrator in your practice group, or your direct supervisors, to let them know what your schedule's like, what the demands are on you, because partners don't just magically know what you have on your plate. You really need to be in communication with them. So if you're concerned about taking on a pro bono matter, first understand what that matter would look like, what the team is going to look like, how much flexibility there is in it. It may be that if you take on an asylum case and it's just two of you, and it's an affirmative case before the asylum office, that you can bring in two more people, because you can have somebody write the asylum brief, or you can have somebody write the country conditions report out of it. You're not going to just have five people dealing with the client, but you may be able to offload some of the work that you've taken on. So look at it from that perspective. I think it again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it bears repeating, is that the people who get into trouble with pro bono work and are people who are not communicating well enough. And some of that is not just on the associate. I don't mean to kind of blame associates on this. Some of it is that they don't feel supported by their practice managers or their supervisors. So they feel like, well, I don't really want to tell them about this because I don't think they'd like that I'm doing a pro bono case. So if that's the case, obviously that's a whole different problem you have there. But assuming that the firm is supportive of your pro bono work, it's on you to make sure you're communicating what that means for your availability and your schedule, and then working through that.
And I would add to this, well, one thing that I've seen, we've had a firm ask us, it was a new type of placement. It was children's habeas. And the firm asked, can you give me an estimate of how many hours this will take? And it can be very hard to estimate, but I went to our team and we had done some of these cases, and we were able to look at our records and give an estimate, a ballpark. And yeah, it was wide, but if it goes this way, we think this is what it took our attorney when she was doing one of these cases, and this was maybe her third case. So, add a little bit onto that, because she's been doing this type of work and she's been doing immigration work. So, here's what it took our attorney to do this case and to get it to this point. So it doesn't hurt to ask those kinds of questions of the organization if you're serious about a case, but you're not sure, what can I expect? And I would also say, Steve, feel free to correct me if this is wrong, but getting back to the idea of due diligence, I would also say, do your due diligence on your firm before you go in. If doing pro bono matters to you, take a look at what they say about pro bono. Many firms publish pro bono reports. You can look at those on their websites and get a sense for whether, is this just lip service to pro bono, or does this firm deeply care about it? And I think there are a lot of firms that deeply care about it, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because they want the best attorneys, and many attorneys care deeply about it. And you all are Duke Law students. I mean, you don't underestimate the power in the marketplace that you have. If pro bono is important to you, it will be important to the firms that want to hire you.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jennifer. And I think in terms of, for those of you who are going to be interviewing this winter, definitely do your research. I'm the co-president of something called the Association of Pro Bono Counsel. We have 266 members at 130 law firms. Those are people who more or less their full-time job is managing pro bono. If a firm has an ABCO member, they're more likely to be taking pro bono pretty seriously, because they've put that commitment in, and they have somebody who's minding the shop on a full-time basis. In terms of kind of, to take this in a slightly different direction for interviews, but pro bono should not be your first question. during an interview process, even if it's something that's very tangible and easy to grasp on. So I understand why it is sometimes. On the other hand, even if, let's say, you're doing 200 hours, 300 hours, that's 15% of your workload. That's not the majority of what you'll be doing. So you want to know that you'll be happy doing all the work at the law firm. I would also caution that pro bono looks different in different practice groups within a law firm. And so if you're asking a corporate partner about their pro bono work, it's going to look very different than asking a litigation associate about her pro bono work. I will say corporate pro bono, there is a fair amount of corporate pro bono. We talked about how immigration can be done by corporate lawyers, but there's lots of other pro bono that can be done, but it's relatively new and relatively harder and doesn't amount to the same number of hours typically. So again, I'm happy to share my contact information. And for those of you who want to talk about interviews, I don't want to kind of go sideways on this on this immigration panel, but it is something that I think is pretty nuanced. But I want to echo what Jennifer said. At the end of the day, you are Duke law students. You are highly sought after. The market for law students is still going to be very good this winter. So you should be asking at the appropriate time about pro bono and making that one of your priorities.
Thank you so much. That was actually one of the questions we had, was about interviewing, and a lot of us are going to be interviewing in January for law firms, and the 1Ls in here will be interviewing for law firms next year. So that was very helpful. And I see that we're running out of time. If you both want to send me your emails, I can post them in the overall chat. Oh, I think, yeah, you can also post them in the overall chat. Never mind. But if there's any last words that either of you want to say about why each of us should definitely take on an immigration pro bono case right when we get to our law firm, I would love to hear that. And thank you both so much for being with us today.
So I will put it in the context of these interviews. So when you think about interviewing, and you talk about pro bono, talk about what you want to get out of pro bono, not just that you want to do it to kind of give back. That is important. But thinking about what is it that you want to achieve. We talked about the skills that you can achieve through that, through pro bono work and specifically immigration work. But in terms of immigration work, and I think one of the reasons why we do it at law firms and why it is so attractive is that, frankly, the stakes are pretty high. One of my colleagues, Karen Grisset at Fried Frank, I think she's the one who coined this expression, but it's kind of like doing death penalty cases in traffic court. It is, there's nothing, still, I get teared up when I am in immigration court, we win a case. Like I've been doing it for 22 years, does not get old. It doesn't, I have dear friends clients who become dear friends. And it is very meaningful work. And I think that's one of the reasons why in the end law firms do it, is because the investment that we make versus the change that we make in people's lives is tremendous. You can't get a better return on investment than you do in immigration cases. You are changing the trajectory of an entire family line often, like the Odolamis, who I mentioned at the beginning, who are now US citizens and very successful here. And if I had screwed up that case 22 years ago, I wouldn't be here today. I certainly would not have taken another one, but the Odolamis probably wouldn't be here either. And that's something that that you just can't replace. And it is an incredible privilege as a lawyer to be able to do that.
I really can't top anything Steve just said on why you should do immigration work. I find it incredibly rewarding. I'm about to take on a SIDGE case for a 9-year-old girl, mostly because she was kept in the shelter for 5 months when she could have reunified with her mom. You'll see these, we have much more. We have cases that tug at the heartstrings so much, but something even like that just gets me, and I want to help in these types of cases. But also, I'll just give a pitch for, even if it's not immigration, there's so many wonderful things that come from doing pro bono work, you know, skills and training for yourself, growing relationships, feeling like you're making a difference out in the world. And so I would just encourage you all to keep pro bono, you know, in mind as you go about organizing, you know, how to best deal with your caseloads and, you know, where you're going to work at a law firm and where you might intern. And, you know, just I hope you'll bear it in mind, because it's really worth doing and really rewarding.
Thank you both so much. That was such an inspiring note to go out on, and overall a really inspiring lunch panel. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I thank you both so much for taking the time to be here. I hope you also enjoyed yourself, and thank you for all of the audience members who could attend right now. I hope you all have a good rest of your week.
Thank you for doing this, Jenny. This is really fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm not there to enjoy barbecue down in Carolina, but
Yeah.
I'll do it by video. Take care, everybody.
Bye.